What would you do if you had $1 left and spent it on a cabin nobody wanted in the middle of Navajo land? That is exactly what one fired cowboy did in 1994. And what he found inside those walls brought down one of the most powerful men in the county. Drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Hit subscribe. And let's begin. Cole Maddox had worked the Sandstone Flats ranch for 12 years. Not 12. Easy years, 12 years of pulling fence posts out of frozen ground before sunrise, of walking fence lines in 100-degree heat, of nursing sick cattle through nights so cold the water in the trough froze solid before morning. He had built the eastern barn with his own hands, poured the concrete. For the new corral dug the well that still ran clear in August, when every other well in the county went brown. He had done all of it, without complaint, without clock watching, without ever once asking for more than what he was owed. He had not done it for the money. He had done it because Sandstone Flats was the first place in his life that felt like something worth taking care of. The morning Derek Sloan called him into the office, Cole already knew. He had known since the week before when the men from Phoenix showed up in 2 white SUVs with clipboards and walking boots that had never seen actual dirt. They had walked the property with Sloan pointing at things, writing things down, and not once looked at the men who actually ran the place. Cole had watched them from the saddle and felt the particular weight of someone who recognizes an ending before it arrives. Sloan's office used to be old Jim Carver's office. Jim had kept it spare, a desk, a chair, a photograph of his wife and 3 daughters, a calendar from the feed store in Farmington. Sloan had replaced all of it. The desk was glass now. There was a computer on it, the kind with a big beige monitor and a fax machine on a separate table. The photograph was gone. Cole stood in the doorway. He did not sit down because Sloan did not invite him to, and because Cole understood standing in this room that used to mean something that sitting down would have felt like a concession he was not prepared to make. Sloan did not look up from his papers right away. He was 40, maybe 42, with the particular physical confidence of a man who has never done hard work and has decided this is not a deficiency. His shirt was pressed. His hands were clean. He looked up finally and said what he said, the way a man reads a weather report. Informational, detached, mildly inconvenient. The operation was being restructured. Modern equipment was coming in. The kind of work Cole did was being consolidated. His position was eliminated effective the end of the month, but given the transition, they were prepared to let him go today, with 2 weeks severance. Cole stood in the doorway and looked at him. Outside the window, he could see the eastern barn. His barn. The roof he had repaired 3 times, the doors. He had rehung the weather vane he had welded from scrap metal one winter when he had nothing else to do, and it seemed like a good thing to make. Sloan set down his pen and added almost as an afterthought that the horse would need to go too. The old Roan in the south paddock. He was eating feed and not producing anything useful, and the new operation didn't have room for animals that weren't earning their keep. Cole looked at him for a long moment. He thought about 12 years. He thought about what 12 years of a man's life looks like when you added up the mornings, and the evenings, and the seasons, and the small particular knowledge of a piece of land that only comes from working it with your hands every day for a very long time. He said 2 words. He said the land's name, and he said goodbye. And he walked out of the office. He went to the south paddock. Roan was standing at the far rail the way he always stood in the morning facing east, watching the light come. He was 18 years old, big-boned and rough-coated, with a left foreleg that had a slight hitch in it from an old wire injury that had healed badly. He was not fast. He had not been fast for years. But he was steady in a way that very few horses are steady. Not the steadiness of obedience, but the steadiness of a creature that has decided the world is worth standing in. Cole opened the gate, and Roan turned and walked to him without being called. Cole put his hand on the horse's neck and stood there for a moment without moving. Behind him, he heard the screen door of the bunkhouse open, and he knew without looking that some of the men were watching. He did not turn around. He took the lead rope from the post, clipped it to Roan's halter, and led him out of the gate and down the road toward the county highway. Nobody called after him. Nobody came out. The screen door closed. That was how 12 years ended. He drove north in his truck with Roan in the trailer. The Four Corners country opening up around him. The red mesas and the flat-topped buttes, and the sky that in October had a particular quality of light, thin and clear, and very far away. He had $42 in his wallet, a change of clothes, his tools in a box in the truck bed, and no particular destination. He stopped for gas in Shiprock and went inside to pay, and the woman behind the counter had a bulletin board on the wall next to the register. The usual things, cards for handymen and babysitters, and a missing dog. And in the lower left corner, a single sheet of paper official-looking, with the seal of San Juan County at the top. Public land auction notice. 1 parcel. Improved structure. Red Mesa Road, 7 miles east of Shiprock. Minimum bid $1. Auction date, October 14th, 1994. Tomorrow. Cole read it twice. He looked at the woman behind the counter. She was Navajo middle-aged, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. He asked her about the property. She looked at the bulletin board, then back at him. She said it wasn't really abandoned. She said the word carefully, the way people say words that carry more than their dictionary definition. She said it had been taken. She didn't say more than that. Cole thought about $42 and a horse trailer and no particular destination. He bought a coffee and a map and drove east on Red Mesa Road. The cabin sat back from the road about 100 yards at the end of a 2-track that had mostly grown over. It was built of stone and timber, the kind of construction that takes time and intention not thrown up in a season. The roof had lost several sections to weather. One window was boarded from the inside. The door was closed and padlocked with a county seal on the hasp. But the walls were thick and the foundation was solid, and Cole walked around it twice with his hand trailing along the stonework and felt the quality of the work that had gone into it. Someone had cared about this building. Someone had built it to last. Behind the cabin, the land dropped away slightly toward a dry wash, and beyond the wash, the desert opened up toward the base of Shiprock, that extraordinary column of volcanic rock rising almost 2,000 feet from the flat ground. Its silhouette against the late afternoon sky, like something that belonged in a different world and had simply decided to stay. Cole stood and looked at it for a long time. He had $42 and a horse with a bad leg and no place to be. He had never owned land. He had never owned a house. He had never owned anything in his adult life that couldn't fit in a truck bed. He came back the next morning. The auction was held in the parking lot of the county annex in Shiprock, a folding table, a county official with a clipboard, and 3 people standing around with varying degrees of interest. Cole was the only one who bid. He put his $42 on the table, and the county official looked at it, and looked at Cole, and looked at the paper, and said the minimum bid was $1. And Cole said he was aware of that, and the official shrugged and stamped the transfer document. Cole signed it. His hand was steady. He was turning to leave when he noticed the old man. He was standing at the edge of the parking lot, not near the table, just watching. 70, maybe older, with the particular stillness of someone who has learned to take up exactly as much space as he needs, and not 1 inch more. He wore a denim jacket and work boots, and his face had the quality of old maps, detailed, weathered, full of information, if you knew how to read it. He looked at Cole with an expression that Cole could not immediately name. Not hostile, not friendly. Something more considered than either. The expression of a man who has been waiting to see which way a thing falls and has just received partial information. Cole nodded to him. The man did not nod back. He simply looked for another moment and then turned and walked to a battered pickup and drove away. Cole stood in the parking lot holding his copy of the transfer document and watching the pickup until it was out of sight. He drove back to the cabin, unloaded Roan from the trailer, tied him to the scrub cedar beside the cabin, and broke the county seal on the padlock. He pushed the door open. The air inside was cold and still, and smelled of wood and dust, and something older than either a smell that is particular to buildings that have been lived in and loved and then closed against their will. The floor was swept clean, not the swept clean of abandonment, but the swept clean of someone who had left carefully, who had closed this place up with intention and grief, rather than simply walking away. On the table in the center of the main room, there was a coffee mug empty, and next to it, a folded piece of cloth. Cole crossed the room and picked up the cloth. It was a piece of wool, hand-woven. The pattern a series of geometric shapes in red and brown and white that Cole did not know the meaning of, but recognized as the kind of thing made slowly and with purpose. He set it back down carefully. He went back outside and stood in the cold October light and looked at the cabin and at Roan standing beside the cedar tree and at Shiprock in the distance and at the clear, empty sky above all of it. He did not know what he was doing here. He did not have a plan. He had $1's worth of legal title to a broken building in the desert and a horse nobody else wanted, and the particular freedom of a man who has lost everything worth calculating and therefore has nothing left to protect. He went back inside and started looking at what needed to be done. That was his first evening at Red Mesa. He worked for 3 days on the roof before anything else, because a roof without holes was the difference between a building and a pile of walls, and Cole was practical in the way that men are practical, when practicality is not a philosophy, but a survival mechanism. He pulled the damaged section, salvaged what timber he could, drove to the lumber yard in Farmington, with the last of the money he'd had in his glove compartment, and came back with enough material to close the gaps. Roan stood in the dry wash during the days, finding what grazing there was among the dry grass and the sage. In the evenings, Cole brought him around to the south side of the cabin, where the wall blocked the wind, and he stood there with his head low and his eyes half closed, in what looked, if you were willing to project, like contentment. On the 4th day, Cole came around the corner of the cabin in the early morning and found a paper bag on the doorstep. Inside was a loaf of bread still warm and a jar of what turned out to be venison stew. No note, no footprints he could identify in the dry ground. He stood in the doorway holding the bag and looked out at the empty road and the desert beyond it, and said nothing. On the 6th day, Joseph Runningwater came to the door. Cole heard the truck before he saw it, the particular sound of an old engine driven by someone who knows how to drive it steady and unhurried. The battered pickup from the auction parking lot. It pulled up the 2-track and stopped, and the old man got out with the same economy of movement Cole had noticed before and walked to the door without hurrying. Cole was on the roof, repointing the chimney mortar. He looked down. The old man looked up. He said his name was Joseph. He said he lived 4 miles north on the same road. He said he had been watching Cole work for several days, and that Cole laid stone the way someone had taught him properly, and that was not as common as it used to be. Cole came down from the roof. They stood in front of the cabin, and Joseph looked at the work Cole had done. The patched roof. The rehung door, the window reglazed with glass he had found in the back of a hardware store in Shiprock for almost nothing. Joseph walked around the cabin slowly, looking at each repair, not speaking. Cole waited. When Joseph came back around to the front, he said, "Do you know why this cabin sold for $1? Cole said he knew it had been taken. He did not know the rest. Joseph looked at him for a long moment with that same considering expression from the parking lot. Then he said, "Come inside. There is something you should know before you put more work into these walls." Cole held the door open. Joseph walked in. He stopped in the center of the room and looked at the coffee mug and the folded cloth on the table. He stood very still for a moment. Then he sat down and began to talk. The cabin had belonged to his daughter's family. His daughter had married a man named Daniel Runningwater, a good man, a hard worker, a man who had built this cabin stone by stone over 3 years in the late 1970s. Daniel had worked construction to pay for the materials. He had done most of the building himself, with Joseph's help on the weekends, and the weekends of several neighbors, who had come out without being asked, because that is what neighbors do when someone is building something worth building. Daniel and his wife had raised their daughter Sarah in this cabin. Sarah had been born here, had grown up here, had gone to school in Shiprock, and come back here every evening, and done her homework at the table where Joseph was now sitting. 2 years ago, Daniel had been working on a construction site near Farmington, a site owned by a company called Southwestern Resources Group. The accident report said equipment failure. Joseph said the words equipment failure with a particular flatness, like a man saying a word in a language he does not believe in. After Daniel died, the property tax bill arrived reassessed at 4 times its previous value. Retroactive 18 months with penalties. The amount owed was more than the cabin and land were worth at any reasonable valuation. The county gave them 90 days. When they could not pay, the property was seized. Sarah had filed a protest. She had hired a lawyer in Albuquerque who took the case on contingency and then withdrew 2 months later without explanation. She had gone to the tribal council. She had gone to the county commission. She had written letters. 3 weeks ago, she had disappeared. Joseph said the word disappeared the same way he had said equipment failure. Flat. Careful. Full of things he was not saying. Cole sat across from him and looked at the table between them and thought about the coffee mug and the folded cloth and the swept floor and the particular grief of a place closed up carefully by someone who intended to come back. He asked Joseph who owned Southwestern Resources Group. Joseph looked at him. He said the name Derek Sloan. The silence in the cabin was complete. Cole looked at his hands on the table. His hands that had built the eastern barn at Sandstone Flats. His hands that had dug the well. His hands that had done 12 years of work for a man who had bought Derek Sloan's company 3 months ago and restructured the operation and eliminated positions that weren't earning their keep. He said, "I used to work for Sloan." Joseph looked at him with an expression that was not surprise. It was the expression of a man who has been playing a long game and has just watched one of the pieces move where he expected it to move. He said, "I know." Cole looked at him. Joseph said, "I have been watching Sandstone Flats for 2 years. I knew when Sloan bought it. I knew when he started the restructuring. When I saw you at the auction, I recognized you. I have been trying to decide since then whether you are someone worth trusting," Cole said, and Joseph was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You put the stew on the doorstep yourself. I put the bread. I wanted to see if you would eat food from a stranger without knowing where it came from." Cole thought about this. He said, "I ate it." Joseph said, "Yes. And you left the cloth on the table exactly where you found it. You did not move it, and you did not take it." Cole looked at the folded cloth. He said nothing. Joseph reached into the inside pocket of his denim jacket and produced a folded envelope. He set it on the table between them. He said Sarah left this with me before she disappeared. She said if she did not come back within 2 weeks, I should give it to someone worth giving it to. It had been 3 weeks. Cole looked at the envelope. He did not pick it up. He asked where Joseph thought Sarah was. Joseph said he believed she was alive. He believed she was hiding. He believed she was hiding because she had found something, or because someone believed she had found something, and the people who wanted that something were not the kind of people who asked politely. Cole looked at the envelope for a long time. Outside, Roan made a sound, not distress, just the soft, questioning sound a horse makes when it wants to know you are still there. Cole had heard that sound 10,000 times. It was the sound of something checking in. He reached out and picked up the envelope. The envelope contained 3 things: a photograph, a folded document, and a handwritten note on a piece of notebook paper. The photograph showed 2 men standing in front of a building Cole recognized as the county annex in Shiprock. One of the men was Derek Sloan. The other was a man Cole did not recognize, heavy-set, in a county employee's shirt holding a folder. They were not looking at the camera. The photograph had been taken from a distance through a car window maybe, and the quality was not perfect, but the faces were clear enough. The folded document was a photocopy of a property assessment record. The original assessment on the Red Mesa parcel, Daniel Runningwater's land dated 1991, showed a tax value of $14,000. A second assessment stamped 18 months later showed $58,000. The signature on the revised assessment was the same man from the photograph. His name printed on the county form was Gerald Pitts, Deputy Assessor San Juan County. The handwritten note was short. It said, "Pitts works for Sloan. Has for 2 years. Dad's accident was not an accident. I have the original site safety reports. They are not at this address. If you are reading this and I have not come back, find Ray Talsalt in Nageezi. He knows where." Cole read the note twice. He set it down on the table next to the photograph and the assessment copy and looked at all 3 of them together. Joseph had not looked at the contents of the envelope. He sat with his hands folded on the table and waited. Cole said she has the safety reports from the construction site. Joseph said yes. Cole said, and she went to find them, or she went to hide them. And either way, she has not come back. Joseph said yes. Cole was quiet for a moment. The wind had come up outside, a desert wind, the kind that comes in the late afternoon in October and carries the smell of cold stone and dry grass, and the particular emptiness of high desert country. It moved against the cabin walls with a low sound that was almost comfortable if you did not think too hard about what was outside it. He asked Joseph about Ray Talsalt. Joseph said Ray was a carpenter, a good one. He had worked construction with Daniel Runningwater for 15 years. He lived alone in Nageezi, 40 miles south. He was a quiet man who minded his own business and remembered everything. Cole said, "Does Sloan know about Ray?" Joseph said he did not think so. He said Sarah had been careful about who she told what. He said Sarah was careful about most things. She had grown up in a world that required carefulness from people who looked like her, and she had learned the lesson young. Cole nodded. He looked at the photograph again. He thought about Sloan's clean hands and his glass desk, and the particular ease of a man who had learned to use systems, legal systems, financial systems, the quiet machinery of county bureaucracy, the way other men use tools. You did not need to get your hands dirty if you knew which levers to pull and which people to pay. He said, "I need to find Sarah before I do anything else." Joseph looked at him. He said why Cole thought about this. He said because these papers are her fight, not mine. I won't make decisions about her fight without her in the room." Joseph looked at him for a long time. Then he said something in Navajo that Cole did not understand. Cole asked what it meant. Joseph said it means something like a man who knows what belongs to him and what does not is a man worth standing next to. Cole folded the 3 items carefully back into the envelope and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He asked Joseph if he knew where Sarah was. Joseph said he thought he did. He was right. She was in the dry wash behind the cabin. Not in distress, not injured, sitting with her back against a boulder. A sleeping bag pulled around her shoulders, a backpack beside her, watching the approach to the cabin with the focused stillness of someone who had been watching for a long time and had gotten good at it. She was 28, lean, with her father's jaw and her grandfather's eyes, the same considering quality, the same habit of looking at a thing from all the angles before committing to a response. She looked at Cole when Joseph brought him around the back of the cabin. She looked at him the way she had probably been looking at the cabin for days, measuring, weighing, waiting to see which way a thing would fall. Cole stopped at a respectful distance. He said, "Your grandfather thinks I can be trusted. I am not going to tell you whether he's right. That is yours to decide." Sarah looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "You fixed the chimney wrong. The mortar on the north side needs to be raked back another ½ inch before you repoint it, or it will crack in the first freeze." Cole looked at her. She looked back. He said, "I'll fix it tomorrow." She said, "Yes, you will." She came inside. They sat at the table, the 3 of them, and Sarah told Cole what she knew, and Cole listened without interrupting. She had been building the case for 8 months quietly, while working at the library in Shiprock during the day and driving to county records offices in 3 different counties on the weekends. She had found the pattern of reassessments, not just her father's land, but 6 other parcels, all in the same corridor, all reassessed in the same 18-month window, all by Gerald Pitts. 5 of the 6 had been seized for unpaid taxes. 3 of the 5 had since been purchased by a shell company registered in Nevada. The Nevada company's registered agent was a law firm in Phoenix. The law firm represented Southwestern Resources Group. Southwestern Resources Group was owned by Derek Sloan. The safety reports were the piece that changed it from a civil matter to a criminal one. If the reports showed that the equipment failure that killed her father had been documented, and the documentation suppressed if someone knew and did nothing, then what happened to Daniel Runningwater was not an accident, and the land seizure that followed was not a coincidence. The safety reports were in a metal box under the floorboards of Ray Talsalt's workshop in Nageezi. Sarah had put them there herself 3 weeks ago. The night before, 2 men in an unmarked truck had parked at the end of Red Mesa Road and sat there for 4 hours. She had not gone back to town since. Cole listened to all of it. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you been sleeping in the wash?" She said, 11 days. He said, "From tonight, you sleep inside." She started to say something. He said, "It is your cabin. I am the guest, but I have a roof and a door that locks, and I'm asking you to sleep inside because it is going to freeze tonight, and the wash does not have walls." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Joseph. Joseph looked at the table. She said, "Fine." One night. She stayed for 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, Cole finished the cabin repairs, built a small lean-to on the south side for Roan, replaced the broken window in the back room, and learned more about the land between Shiprock and Nageezi than he had learned about any piece of ground he had ever worked. Sarah knew it the way people know places they grew up in, not as geography, but as memory. That mesa was where her father had taken her to watch the meteor showers. That dry wash was where she had learned to ride. The particular slant of afternoon light on the cabin wall in October was the light her mother had called the honey hour, because everything turned gold and slow. Cole listened to these things the way he listened to everything carefully, without comment, storing the information in the same part of himself where he kept the knowledge of how stone lays and where water runs in a dry summer. On the 9th day, Joseph arrived with a man Cole had not met, a younger man, 30s, with a pickup truck full of tools and lumber. Joseph said his name was Ray Tallsalt, and that he had driven up from Nageezi because he had heard someone was doing work on Daniel Runningwater's cabin, and he wanted to see it. Ray walked around the cabin the way Joseph had, slowly looking at everything. He ran his hand along the new framing around the back window. He looked at the repointed chimney. He looked at the lean-to Cole had built for Roan, the way the rafters were notched, the angle of the roof. He said to Cole, "You were taught by someone who knew what they were doing." Cole said, "My father." Before he left, Ray said nothing to this, but he nodded in a way that meant he understood more than the words. Ray opened the tailgate of his truck and began unloading lumber. Cole looked at the lumber and looked at Ray and said he didn't know what it was for. Ray said the front step is wrong. It has been wrong since Daniel built it, and Daniel knew it was wrong and always meant to fix it, and never did. He said it like a man talking about something that had been waiting a long time to be addressed. They spent the afternoon building the front step. Ray worked the way good craftsmen work economically, without waste, with the particular quiet satisfaction of someone doing a thing correctly. Cole worked beside him, and they did not talk much, but the silence between them was the good kind, the kind that happens when two people are engaged in the same task, and the task itself is the conversation. At some point during the afternoon, Roan came around from the lean-to and stood near the work watching. Sarah came out of the cabin and stood in the doorway and stopped. She stood very still. Cole was kneeling over the new step-boards and did not look up immediately, and by the time he did, Sarah had crossed the yard and was standing at Roan's head with both hands on the horse's face and her forehead against his and her eyes closed. Cole set down his hammer. Ray set down his. Joseph, who was sitting on an overturned bucket by the cabin wall, looked at his granddaughter and said nothing. Cole had not told Sarah about Roan. He had not known there was anything to tell. He had known the horse for 12 years and had known his history only in the practical sense. Wire injury left foreleg good temperament. He had not known where Roan came from before Sandstone Flats. He looked at Joseph. Joseph said quietly, "Daniel sold him to Carver's ranch 5 years ago, to pay a debt." Cole looked at Roan and at Sarah, with her forehead against the horse's nose. The horse standing absolutely still. The way he always stood with that steadiness, that was not the steadiness of obedience, and understood without being told that the horse had been the last thing her father sold before he died, and that the debt he had sold it to pay had probably been the beginning of the end. He picked up his hammer and went back to work because there was nothing else useful he could do, and the step needed finishing. That evening, he drove to Nageezi with Ray, and they came back with the metal box. It was a standard lock box, the kind you could buy at any hardware store, and it was heavier than it looked. Cole put it in the kitchen and did not open it. That was Sarah's business. He made coffee and went outside and stood with Roan until the stars came out. The trouble arrived 10 days later. Cole had gone to the lumber yard in Farmington for supplies and come back in the early afternoon to find Pete Garza's truck parked at the end of Red Mesa Road. Pete was 26 from Tucson, had come to Sandstone Flats 2 summers ago looking for work. Cole had been the one who hired him. He had taught Pete most of what Pete knew about ranch work, how to read cattle, how to lay fence, how to read weather. He had liked Pete, or had thought he did, in the uncomplicated way you like someone who works hard and doesn't cause problems. Pete was sitting on the hood of his truck, watching Cole's truck come down the road. When Cole pulled up and got out, Pete got off the hood and put his hands in his pockets and looked at the ground. Cole stood by his truck and looked at. Yeah. Pete said, "Sloan knows you found the girl." Cole said nothing. Pete said he knows about the box, he said. And here, Pete stopped and rubbed the back of his neck and did not look up. He said he'd pay me to tell him. "If you found the papers." I didn't tell him about the papers. I just told him you found the girl. I thought he stopped again. Cole waited. Pete said, "I still have my job. My mother is sick, and I've been sending money home, and I can't afford to lose the job right now. And Sloan came to me directly, and I didn't know what else to do." Cole looked at him for a long time. He thought about 12 years of mourning. He thought about what it meant to teach someone something and have them use it wrong. He thought about Pete's mother in Tucson and the money going home every month and the particular mathematics of desperation that makes a person do things they will carry for a long time afterward. He said, "The home, Pete." Pete looked up. He said, "Cole, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you myself instead of just Cole." Said, "I know. Go home." Pete got in his truck. Cole watched him drive away down Red Mesa Road until the truck was small in the distance and then gone. He stood on the road for another minute. The desert was very quiet. In the far distance, shiprock stood against the sky. He got back in his truck and drove up the 2-track to the cabin. He told Sarah and Joseph what had happened and what it meant. Sloan knew where they were. He did not yet know about the box, or at least Pete had not told him. But that would not hold for long. Sarah looked at the metal box on the kitchen table. She said, "How long do we have?" Cole said, "Not long." Joseph said nothing. He was looking at the box with an expression Cole had not seen on him before. Not fear, but something older than fear, the look of a man who has been in a long fight and recognizes the moment when it is about to become a different kind of fight. Cole said, "I think it is time to tell me everything you know about Sloan, not just what's in the box." "Everything." Joseph looked at him. Cole said, "Because what is in that box is evidence of what he did. But to use it, we need to understand how he thinks. And I have worked for the man, and I have watched him operate, and I think I know some of it. But you have been watching him for 2 years, and I need what you know." Joseph was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right." Outside, the wind had come up again. The first real cold of the season was moving in from the north. In the lean-to, Roan shifted his weight and was still. What Joseph knew about Derek Sloan could be organized into 2 categories: what was provable and what was true. Joseph had spent 2 years understanding the difference between these categories and the space between them, which was where men like Sloan lived. What was provable, Southwestern Resources Group had applied for a natural gas extraction permit on a corridor of land running from Farmington south to the Arizona border. The corridor ran directly through 6 parcels of land, all in Navajo territory, or adjacent to it all now, either seized by the county or purchased for below market value. The permits were pending review by the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the New Mexico State Land Office. The review was expected to take 18 months. It had been under review for 14 months. What was true, the man conducting the BIA review had gone on a fishing trip to Wyoming in August at the expense of a hospitality company registered in Nevada. The Nevada company shared a registered agent with the shell company that had purchased 3 of the 6 parcels. Joseph had the receipts. He had obtained them legally through a FOIA request he had filed under a name other than his own, through a retired colleague who still knew how to navigate federal bureaucracy. What was also true, Joseph Runningwater had been a land rights attorney for the Navajo Nation for 22 years. He had retired in 1984 after losing a case that had taken 6 years and ended with a federal judge ruling that a previous treaty provision superseded the land rights claim his clients had spent a generation asserting. He had not practiced law since. He had not stopped paying attention. Cole listened to all of this at the kitchen table while the wind built outside and the temperature in the cabin dropped noticeably despite the fire in the stove. Sarah sat across from him with the metal box on the table between them. She had not opened it yet. She was watching Cole listen to her grandfather with the same considering expression that seemed to run in the family, measuring something she had not yet named. When Joseph finished, Cole was quiet for a while. He said the box has the safety reports. Sarah said yes. He said, and the safety reports show the equipment failure was documented and suppressed. She said yes. The site supervisor filed an internal report the day before the accident, noting that the crane assembly had a fatigue fracture in the primary load-bearing joint. The report was filed on a Thursday. Dad died on a Saturday. The official accident investigation found no prior documentation of any mechanical issues. Cole said the site supervisor is still alive. Sarah said he left Southwestern Resources 8 months after the accident. He is now working for a construction company in Albuquerque. His name is in the box. Cole looked at the box. He looked at Joseph. He said, "You have been building this case for 2 years." Joseph said, "I have been building it, but I am not a practicing attorney. I am an old man with research skills and a filing system. What I have built is a foundation. To do anything with it requires someone with standing with the authority to take it somewhere it will be heard." Cole said the Navajo Nation Legal Office. Joseph said, "Yes. There is an attorney there named Marcus Bitsley who handles land rights cases. I have spoken to him twice. He knows the outline of the situation. He has been waiting for the safety reports. Those reports are the difference between a civil case and a federal criminal investigation." Sarah said, "Which is why Sloan wants them." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind hit the cabin in a long, sustained gust that made the new roof sections flex slightly and then settle. Cole had done good work on the roof. It held. He said, "How long before Sloan moves?" Joseph said, "I think we have tonight." Cole looked at him. Joseph said he will not come himself at first. He will send someone to offer you money. He has done this with others. He makes an offer that is large enough to be tempting and reasonable enough to be declined without drama. If you decline it, then the situation becomes more complicated. Cole said, "And if I take it?" Sarah looked at him sharply. Cole looked at her and said, "I am asking a question, not making a suggestion." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the table. Joseph said, "If you take the money, the box disappears, and the case disappears, and in 18 months, the permits are approved, and the extraction begins. And this land is worth nothing except what comes out of the ground, which will not go to the people who live on it." Cole nodded. He said, "All right. Tonight, then." He went to the lean-to and brought Roan inside into the back room, which was wide enough and whose floor was solid enough. Roan walked in without drama. He stood in the back room and looked at the situation with his dark, patient eyes and appeared to make no judgment about it. Cole checked the door. He checked the window. He put the metal box in the back room with Roan and covered it with a saddle blanket, not because this was an especially good hiding place, but because any impediment to immediate access was worth something. Then he came back to the main room and sat down and waited. Sloan came himself. Cole had not expected that. He had expected the men in the unmarked truck, had expected the instrumental version of the conversation, the version conducted by proxies, who could be disclaimed. Instead, at a little after 9 in the evening, headlights came up the 2-track, and a single vehicle pulled up to the cabin, and Derek Sloan got out. He was alone, or appeared to be alone. He knocked on the door, which Cole found faintly absurd, given the circumstances, and Cole opened it. Sloan looked older than he had in the office at Sandstone Flats. Or maybe he looked the same, and Cole was seeing him differently now, without the architecture of the office around him, without the glass desk and the computer and the fax machine. Just a man standing in the cold outside a stone cabin in the New Mexico desert. He was wearing a good coat and clean boots, and he looked like what he was, a man from somewhere else, standing in a place he did not understand. He said, "Cole, can we talk?" Cole stood in the doorway and did not step aside to let him in. Sloan said, "I'm not here to make trouble. I understand you've had a rough few weeks and I want to make that right." Cole said nothing. Sloan reached into his coat and produced an envelope. He held it out. He said $10,000, cash. "You take Roan and you go wherever you want to go, and we don't have to see each other again. That's a fair number for a man who needs a fresh start." Cole looked at the envelope. He thought about 12 years. He thought about the eastern barn and the well and the weather vane he had welded from scrap metal one winter, when it seemed like a good thing to make. He thought about Pete's truck parked at the end of the road, and Pete's hands in his pockets, and Pete not able to look him in the eye. He thought about Daniel Runningwater building this cabin stone by stone over 3 years, and dying on a Saturday because someone had filed a report on a Thursday and nothing happened. He thought about Roan in the back room, standing on solid floor under a repaired roof, quiet in the way that horses are quiet when they are somewhere they have been before. He looked at the envelope in Sloan's hand. Then he looked at Sloan's face. He said no. Sloan's expression did not change immediately. He was a man practiced at maintaining surfaces, and the surface held for a moment. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, not exactly, but the recalibration of a man who has been running a particular calculation and has received an input he did not account for. He said that is a significant amount of money for a man in your position. Cole said, "I know what it is." Sloan said, "I think you should consider your position more carefully," before Cole said, "I have considered it. The answer is no. You should go now." Sloan looked at him for a moment longer. He looked past Cole into the cabin, just briefly, a quick assessment. Then he looked back at Cole, and his expression completed its shift. The surface quality dropped away, and what was underneath was simply business, the cold, functional assessment of someone who has moved from one approach to the next. He said, "All right." He put the envelope back in his coat. He said, "We'll talk again." Cole said, "Drive safe." Sloan got back in his vehicle. Cole watched the headlights go back down the 2-track and turn onto Red Mesa Road and diminish into the darkness. He stood in the doorway for another minute. The cold was serious now. His breath made small clouds in the lamplight. Behind him in the cabin, he heard Sarah's voice low speaking to Joseph in Navajo, too quiet to follow. He did not need to follow it. He turned and went back inside. Joseph was on his feet. He said, "We need to move tonight. The documents need to go to Bitsilly before Sloan has time to think about what comes next." Cole said, "How do we get them there?" Joseph said, "I drive to Window Rock tonight. I have done it before. I know the roads." Cole looked at him. Joseph was 70 years old, and it was 9 in the evening, and the temperature outside was dropping toward 20. Joseph said, "Do not look at me like that. I drove those roads for 40 years. I will drive them tonight." Cole said, "I'll drive you." Joseph started to object. Cole said, "It is not a discussion. You navigate, I drive. Sarah stays here with the cabin. Sarah said I am not staying here, Cole said. I know, but someone has to, and it is your cabin. And Sloan has already seen you are not a factor. He has accounted for correctly, which means the cabin is safer with you in it than empty. She looked at him. She said that logic is terrible. He said, I know. But will you stay? She was quiet for a moment. She looked at her grandfather. Joseph gave her nothing, just that steady look. She said, fine. One night, Cole went to the back room and got the metal box. Roan watched him take it from under the saddle blanket with an expression of complete equanimity. Cole put his hand on the horse's neck for a moment. He said, I'll be back by morning. They drove south through the desert night, Joseph in the passenger seat, with the metal box on his lap, Cole driving with both hands. The headlights picking out the road ahead in the particular way they do in open country. A moving circle of visibility in the surrounding dark. Joseph gave directions without consulting a map because he did not need one. He had been driving these roads since before there were good roads to drive. They did not talk much. At one point, somewhere south of Nagizi, Joseph said, my son-in-law built something worth keeping. Cole said yes. Joseph said, I want to see it given back. Cole said, we are trying. They arrived in Window Rock at 2 a.m. Joseph directed Cole to a residential street, a small house with a light on. He said, Marcus keeps late hours. He said it as a statement of fact. Marcus Bitsley was 40 compact, with reading glasses and a coffee cup, and the focused unsurprise of a man who has received unexpected visitors at 2 a.m. before. He looked at the box. He looked at Joseph. He said, is this what I think it is? Joseph said, open it. Marcus opened it. He read for 15 minutes, while Cole and Joseph sat in his kitchen and drank coffee and did not speak. At some point, Marcus got up and made a phone call in the other room. He came back and sat down and looked at the two of them. He said, this is enough. He said those 3 words with a particular weight that Cole recognized as a legal judgment, not an emotional one. A professional evaluation of evidentiary sufficiency, not enough for a good feeling or a moral conclusion. Enough to take somewhere and have it heard. Joseph said, what happens now? Marcus said, I called the U.S. Attorney's office in Albuquerque in the morning. This goes federal, the land fraud, the suppressed safety documentation, the BIA review manipulation. Sloan will be facing a federal investigation within the week. The extraction permits will be frozen pending review. The seized properties go into a legal hold. Cole said, and the land Marcus said. The original assessment fraud means the seizure proceedings were invalid. The land should revert. It will take time. These things always take time, but the case is strong. Cole said how much time Marcus said for Sarah to have a legitimate claim reestablished. 6 months, maybe less. Cole looked at his coffee cup. He thought about 6 months. He thought about a cabin in the desert that had been built stone by stone by a man who had intended it to last, and about what a building needs more than anything else, which is not walls or roof or foundation, but someone who intends to come back to it. They drove back north in the early morning, arriving at Red Mesa as the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. The cabin had a lamp burning in the window. Cole saw it from the road and felt something settle in him that he could not have named, but would have recognized as the feeling of returning to a place that is waiting for you. Sarah was awake, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, the folded cloth on the table in front of her. She looked up when they came in. She looked at Joseph first, reading his expression the way granddaughters read grandfathers. Then she looked at Cole. She said it worked. Joseph sat down heavily in his chair. He said Marcus has the box. He will call the U.S. attorney in the morning. Sarah was quiet for a moment. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She said it has been 2 years. Joseph said yes. She put her hands flat on the table, on either side of the folded cloth. She said nothing else. Cole went to check on Roan. The horse was standing in the back room exactly where he had left him. Patient, steady, watching the door with no particular urgency. Cole unlatched the back door and let him out through the cold dawn to the lean-to. He got him water and hay. He stood with him for a while in the lean-to, in the particular quiet of early morning, when the light is new and the wind has not yet started. He thought about the federal investigation, and the 6 months, and what it meant for a cabin in the desert, and the people who belonged to it. He thought about $10,000 in an envelope, and the ease with which he had said no, and what that ease said about where he was now, versus where he had been 3 weeks ago, when he had stood in Sloane's office with 12 years becoming past tense. He thought about what he owned: a truck, a horse, a box of tools, $1 worth of legal title to a piece of land that belonged by rights and history to someone else. He went back inside. The 4 of them, Cole and Sarah and Joseph, and in a manner of speaking, Roan spent the next 6 weeks in a particular suspension that is specific to situations where something large and consequential is in motion, and there is nothing to do but wait and work. The federal investigation opened. Sloane's assets were frozen pending review. Gerald Pitts was placed on administrative leave by San Juan County. The BIA review was suspended. Ray Tallsalt came back twice, each time with lumber in his truck, and an unspoken understanding of what the work was for. The front step he had rebuilt was good work, solid level properly joined. And each time he came, he added something else: a new frame around the back door, a set of shelves for the kitchen, a carved wooden panel for the main door. The geometric pattern worked into the wood with a patience and skill that was not the buckled speed of someone doing a job, but the pace of someone making something that should last. Joseph's neighbors came by on a Sunday. Then more neighbors. The word had moved through the community the way word moves in places where people have been watching a situation for a long time and are ready to respond when the situation shifts. People brought things: tools, food hardware, time. An older couple from 4 miles north showed up one Saturday and spent the day working without explanation. Cole worked alongside them, and they communicated in the language of shared labor, which needs no translation. On the day the federal court issued a temporary injunction, freezing Sloane's extraction permits and placing the seized properties in legal hold, Marcus Bitsley drove up from Window Rock with a copy of the order and set it on the table in the cabin. Everyone in the room looked at it. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Sarah made coffee, and they sat together and drank it. 6 months later, the court ruled that the original tax assessments on Daniel Runningwater's land were fraudulent, and the seizure proceedings invalid. The property reverted. The paperwork came through on a Wednesday afternoon. Marcus brought it himself. Cole was repointing the north chimney, the section Sarah had told him to fix the morning they met. He came down from the roof when he saw Marcus's truck, and Marcus handed him the document, and he read it and handed it to Sarah. She read it standing in the dooryard with the winter sun on her face, the document in both hands. And Cole watched her read it and did not look away, because it seemed important to witness this and not to look away from it. She looked up. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Joseph, who was sitting on the front step that Ray had built, his hands on his knees, his face turned slightly toward Shiprock. She looked at Cole. She said, "It says the property reverts to the estate of Daniel Runningwater." Marcus said, "Which means you, as next of kin." She said, "And the cabin." Marcus said, "And the cabin." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, there was a clause in my father's original title document, a handwritten addition he put in when he filed the original deed. He told me about it once. I think I was 12, and I didn't understand it then. He said, if this land is ever taken from us, it belongs to the first person who keeps the fire burning in it. Marcus looked at Cole. Cole looked at the document in Sarah's hands. He said, I don't want anyone's land. Sarah said, I know. That is why the clause matters. He said it the way he said everything else. This is not about wanting. This is about what is. Cole looked at the front step Ray had built, and at the panel Ray had carved for the door, and at the chimney he was in the process of repointing correctly, and at Roan, standing in the lean-to watching the proceedings with patient equanimity. He said, What do you want to do? She said. I want to put both our names on it, yours and mine, not because you earned it by staying, but because you stayed without being asked, and that is a different thing. Cole thought about this for a moment. He thought about 12 years at Sandstone Flats, and the eastern barn, and the well, and the weather vane. He thought about what it means to build something and have it not be yours, and whether that is the same as having wasted the building. He said, All right, both names. Marcus had the paperwork ready. Cole had the impression that Marcus had expected this answer, had perhaps prepared for it based on 2 conversations and a fair amount of reading of people. He spread the documents on the table inside, and Cole and Sarah signed them, and Joseph witnessed them, and it was done. The name on the title was Maddox Running Water. Both names. The land that Daniel Running Water had built this cabin on stone by stone in the last years of the 1970s was Maddox Running Water land now. It was a small piece of ground in the high desert of New Mexico, and it had a repaired roof and a new front step, and a carved door panel, and a chimney that was finally, after all these years, mortared correctly. That evening, Cole hung a lamp outside the front door. Not a porch light. A real lamp, the kind that burns kerosene, that throws a warm circle of light against the darkness. He had found it in the back of the hardware store in Shiprock, and cleaned it, and put a new wick in it, and hung it on a hook he had set in the stone above the door. He stood back and looked at it. Joseph came out and stood beside him. He did not speak. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the lamp for a while, and then looked at Shiprock, which was visible in the clear, cold night, its black shape against the stars, permanent and indifferent and enormous. Sarah came out and stood in the doorway behind them. Roan was in the lean-to. The desert was very quiet. Cole looked at his hands, the hands that had built the eastern barn, and dug the well, and repointed the chimney, and laid the roof sections, and spent 12 years making a place belong to someone who would never put his name on it. These hands. He thought 12 years of work does not disappear because someone changes the ownership papers. It is in the walls and the well and the foundation. It is in the specific angle of the weather vane on the barn in Sandstone Flats that he had welded from scrap metal, and that was probably still there, still turning in the wind, belonging to no one in particular, and therefore, in some sense, still his. Work does not disappear. It accumulates. It becomes the walls. He looked at the lamp burning above the door and thought about the folded cloth on the table and the coffee mug and the swept floor and the man who had built this place to last and had been right that it would last, just not in the way he had planned. Because nothing lasts in the way you plan, but some things last anyway. He looked at Shiprock in the dark. The lamp burned steadily in the cold air, casting its circle of warmth against the stone wall of the cabin, visible from the road, visible from the wash, visible from a long way off in the flat, dark desert. A light in a window, the oldest signal there is, the one that says someone is here, Someone intends to stay. Cole stood under it, and for the first time in longer than he could calculate, did not feel like a man with nowhere to be. What became of the people at Red Mesa Derek Sloan was indicted on federal charges of land fraud, obstruction of justice, and criminal negligence in connection with the death of Daniel Runningwater in 1994. He pleaded no contest in 1996 and served 14 months in federal prison. Southwestern Resources Group was dissolved. The extraction permits were never approved. Gerald Pitts resigned from San Juan County and was not prosecuted. Marcus Bitsley went on to argue 3 landmark Navajo land rights cases before the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Joseph Runningwater lived to 81. He died in the spring, in a chair on the front step of the cabin, watching the light change on shiprock. Ray Talsalt built the furniture for the main room over the following 2 years, piece by piece, each piece better than the last. Pete Garza sent Cole a letter in the spring of 1995. Cole wrote back. It was not a long letter, but it was a real one. Sarah Runningwater earned a law degree from the University of New Mexico in 1998. She practiced land rights law in the Four Corners region for the next 20 years. Roan died at 23 in the lean-to. Cole had built him in the winter of 1999. Cole buried him on the rise behind the cabin, in the spot where you could see both the cabin and shiprock at the same time. Cole Maddox lived at Red Mesa for the rest of his life. He never owned another ranch. He never worked for anyone else again. He kept the lamp burning above the door every night for 30 years. People said you could see it from the highway on clear nights. People said if you were lost in that part of the desert and you saw a light, you followed it. It would bring you to a stone cabin with a carved door and a good front step where a man with quiet hands would let you in and give you coffee and not ask you anything. You weren't ready to answer. If this story reached you, drop us a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. And if it moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit subscribe so you never miss a story like this one.